welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The Aurora 7 space station hung suspended in the infinite void, where the flickering light of Valtharian's distant glow whispered ancient secrets through the thick glass of the observation deck. Lieutenant Ethan Caldwell, the station's chief engineer, wasn't the type to chase reckless temptations. He prided himself on control, on keeping a clear head amidst tangled machinery and sterile orders. But tonight, as starlight streamed through the viewport, casting faint glimmers across the metallic walls, an unshakable restlessness gripped him, as if the universe itself was luring him into a dangerous game. "We shouldn't be doing this," Thera, the Valtharian biologist, whispered, her voice trembling slightly under the warmth of his breath. Her silver skin shimmered like polished pearl in the dim light, the natural patterns of her species pulsing faintly along her neck and shoulders. Her hands pressed lightly against his chest, a fragile resistance that felt more like a ritual before surrender. Ethan smirked, his lips brushing her ear, where the glowing patterns seemed to hum with her heartbeat. "You say that, but your eyes are telling a different story," he murmured, his voice low and provocative. Ethan wasn't a man who lived carelessly. He was an engineer, a problem solver, someone who tamed chaos into order. But the long months aboard Aurora 7 had worn him down, like the cold void grinding away at any soul. The advanced air filtration system he designed, a breakthrough that could let humans thrive on hostile planets where the atmosphere was an enemy, had been rejected by the Alliance Council for budget constraints. Colonel Ramsey, the station's commander, had called it a pipe dream, his voice sharp as a blade slicing through Ethan's hopes. He'd poured sweat and heart into that project, nights spent hunched in the lab, hands stained with grease, eyes red from sleeplessness, only to receive a pat on the shoulder and hollow platitudes. The failure left an invisible scar, and tonight, in Thera's private quarters, he sought to soothe it. Thera, with her deep violet eyes like distant nebulae and a smile both guarded and inviting, had invited him to discuss a new biological sample. But they both knew it was a pretext. A glass of amber stellaris, bitter yet sweet, had shattered the wall between them. A few playful jabs, charged glances, and then, like a supernova's burst, they were here, on a cramped sofa, clothes askew, breaths mingling in the confined space. Ethan's hands glided over her shoulders, feeling the cool, silken strength of her silver skin, a hallmark of the Valthar. He pulled her closer, fingers tracing the curve of her hip, his heart pounding like a thruster at full burn. "Sure you want me to stop?" he teased, his voice light but his eyes blazing, as if daring the cosmos itself. Thera tilted her head, a flicker of wariness in her eyes, like a wild creature sensing danger. "Ethan, you're my subordinate," she said, her voice wavering, though her fingers clutched his shirt, nails grazing the fabric as if reluctant to let go. "If Ramsey finds out, if anyone does—" She paused, biting her lip, her full lips gleaming in the faint light. Ethan leaned in, his lips grazing her neck, where the glowing patterns pulsed like living circuits. "Ramsey's busy with inventory, and the Alliance Council is a million light-years away," he whispered, his voice a promise. "And me? I just want to know what you're like when you're not playing the cold, distant scientist." She let out a soft laugh, half shy, half delighted, a rare melody in the station's sterile silence. Their lips met again, fiercer this time, as if trying to banish the cold void outside. The kiss deepened, Thera's breath hot against the chill of her skin, a contrast that sent a shiver through Ethan. His hands moved downward, tugging at the zipper of her uniform, the metallic clicks loud in the quiet room. She responded, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, as if dissolving the boundary between human and Valthar. But as her jacket slipped from her shoulders, a sudden flare of light erupted from her back, so bright it froze Ethan in place. It wasn't the natural patterns he'd seen on her neck or arms, those soft, flowing designs. Instead, it was a network of sharp, glowing blue lines, etched into her skin like circuitry, radiating an unnatural, frigid light. Each line was too precise, too deliberate, like a blueprint from a mind far beyond human. Thera gasped, yanking her jacket back up with startling speed, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't look," she whispered, her voice trembling, almost pleading. "Please, Ethan, forget what you saw." She turned away, pressing against the sofa, her breath ragged, as if fleeing a nightmare. Ethan stood frozen, his heart hammering, adrenaline surging. He wasn't the station's best engineer by chance. He knew an anomaly when he saw one, and that glowing network wasn't decorative. It was something secret, dangerous, something that could change everything between them. "Thera," he said, his voice low but firm, trying to calm her. "I didn't mean to. But what was that? I need to know." She shook her head, her silver hair falling to shield her eyes. "You wouldn't understand, Ethan. If you knew, you'd be in danger." Her voice cracked, caught between flight and confession. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble. "Thera, I saw you scared, and I can't ignore that. Trust me." She looked up, her violet eyes blazing, not with starlight now, but with a deeper mix of fear and hope. She took a shuddering breath, as if bracing for a leap into the abyss. "If I tell you, there's no going back. Not just for me, but for you." Ethan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm ready." But before she could speak, a sharp chime sounded from the comms unit on the table. "Lieutenant Caldwell, report to the command center immediately." Colonel Ramsey's voice cut through, cold and unyielding. Thera flinched, panic flashing in her eyes. "They can't see me here," she whispered, hastily adjusting her uniform. Ethan grabbed her hand, squeezing gently. "Stay here. I'll handle Ramsey." "But we're not done." He stepped out, his heart heavy, the image of that glowing network seared into his mind. What he'd seen wasn't just Thera's secret. It was a gateway to a game far more perilous than he'd imagined, and he just crossed its threshold. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his cramped quarters, the blue glow of his computer screen casting harsh shadows across his tense face, highlighting the sharp lines of a man consumed. The image of the glowing network on Thera's back clung to his mind like an unsolvable blueprint. Those sharp, luminescent blue lines, too perfect, too intentional to be natural, they weren't like any Valtharian patterns he'd seen before. He typed a command into the system, fingers flying over the keys. "Search for abnormal Valtharian biological markers." The AI's emotionless voice responded, as cold as the void outside. "Data restricted. Valtharians limit biological information to non-native species. No records of artificial luminescent patterns." Ethan rubbed his temples, a dull ache spreading. He glanced at the clock, 2:30. His shift started in 4 hours, but sleep was a luxury now, as scarce as oxygen on a dead world. He recalled Thera's terrified eyes, not just embarrassment but primal fear, as if he'd stumbled onto a secret that could kill them both. Unwilling to give up, Ethan tried accessing Thera's personnel file through Aurora 7's internal network. The screen flickered, then flashed red. "Warning, Alpha-level clearance required." He frowned. Alpha clearance was reserved for the station commander, beyond a lieutenant's reach. Thera's public file was sparse, suspiciously so. Thera, 32, graduate of the Valtharian Science Academy, served on 3 research vessels before Aurora 7. No personal details, no family, no homeworld. Too clean, too perfect, like a canvas painted to hide the truth. Ethan leaned back, the chair creaking, his mind racing. A scientist of Thera's caliber wouldn't have such a thin record. Something was wrong, and he needed answers. A sudden knock jolted him, adrenaline spiking. "Who's there?" he asked, voice taut. "Thera." Her voice came through the speaker, low but urgent, carrying a barely concealed edge. Ethan quickly shut off the screen, his heart pounding. He stood, took a deep breath to steady himself, and opened the door. Thera stood in the hallway, still in her silver-gray science uniform, her silver hair tightly bound, her violet eyes glowing under the corridor's harsh lights like amethysts trapped in shadow. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but her eyes flickering, as if standing at a dangerous crossroads. She stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss, sealing them in. Thera didn't sit. She paced, each step tense, like a caged animal. Her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms, leaving faint marks. "You saw something you weren't supposed to," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but heavy with a weight that thickened the air. Ethan stood, keeping his tone calm despite his racing pulse. "I didn't mean to, Thera. But I can't pretend I didn't see it. Those lines, they're not natural." "What are they?" She stopped, turning to face him, her eyes wavering between fear and resolve, as if torn between fleeing and confronting her truth. "If I tell you, you'll be in danger," she said, her voice trembling. "Both of us will." Ethan stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, his breath mingling with the room's cold air. "Then let me understand," he said, his voice steady, a vow he couldn't retract. "I saw you afraid, Thera, and I can't walk away from that. Not after what happened." He paused, recalling the fierce kiss on her sofa, the cool silver of her skin under his hands, and the light that shattered the moment. Thera met his gaze, her violet eyes softening, searching for a spark of hope in him. After a moment's hesitation, she sat, her hands gripping each other until her knuckles paled. "What I say doesn't leave this room," she whispered, her voice a final warning. "If it does, we're dead." She took a shuddering breath, as if pulling herself from a nightmare. "The mark you saw is called the Neural Lattice," she began, her voice low but clear, each word measured. "It's not a decoration. It marks me as an experiment. The Valtharians created me in a covert program, genetically enhanced for intelligence, strength, and survival. I'm one of the few who survived." Ethan's stomach twisted, as if he'd been sucked into a black hole. "Genetic enhancement?" he echoed, his voice hoarse. "Why hide it?" Thera gave a bitter smile, devoid of joy. "Because it's banned by the Alliance. The program violated the Alliance Biorights Treaty. It was shut down 15 years ago, but those like me, products, are seen as weapons. If discovered, I'd be erased to protect Valtharian secrets." She stood, moving to the window, staring at the distant, twinkling stars. "I escaped 5 years ago," she continued, her voice dropping, as if reliving a painful memory. "I forged a new identity, erased my past, lived in shadows, moving from station to station. But I can't run forever." She turned, her eyes sharp. "Next week, a Valtharian delegation arrives to inspect Aurora 7. They have devices that can detect the lattice. If they find me, it's over." Ethan's blood surged, adrenaline flooding his system. He stepped forward, taking her hand, feeling the chill of her silver skin under his fingers. "We'll find a way," he said, his voice resolute, a sworn oath. "I won't let them take you." Thera looked at him, her gaze softening, though a flicker of doubt lingered. "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. "You don't really know me. Why risk it?" Ethan gave a faint smile, his fingers tightening around hers. "Because I know enough to see you're not a weapon. And because I can't stop thinking about you." She let out a soft laugh, a fleeting light in the darkness. But before she could reply, an urgent signal buzzed from Ethan's comms unit. "Lieutenant Caldwell, report to the engineering bay immediately." Ramsey's voice cut through, cold and unusually urgent. Thera flinched, panic flashing in her eyes. "They can't know I'm here," she whispered, moving to the door. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her back. "Stay. I'll handle it." "But Thera, we need a plan." He stepped out, his heart heavy, the neural lattice burning in his mind, along with a growing sense that this secret wasn't just about Thera. It threatened all of Aurora 7. The next morning, Ethan stood in Aurora 7's main command center, his silver-gray uniform crisp, but his mind a tangle of shorted circuits. The white glare of the control panels lit his face, highlighting the tense lines, his blue eyes scanning the dancing numbers on the screens, but his thoughts were fixed on Thera, and the deadly secret etched into her skin. Last night, after leaving her quarters, he'd rigged a small sensor into his sleeve, a makeshift device to detect Valtharian tech frequencies. He wasn't the station's best engineer by luck. He knew how to prepare for invisible threats. But when the Valtharian delegation arrived ahead of schedule, striding into the room with the cold precision of predators, his heart pounded like an engine pushed past its limits. Ambassador Clive, the delegation's leader, was tall and gaunt, his silver skin glinting under the lights, his eyes sharp as surgical blades. He moved with a terrifying grace, each step calculated to exert pressure. Beside him was Commander Anther, a muscular Valtharian officer, his arms clutching a handheld scanner that emitted a shrill hum, like insects in the night. As Anther passed Ethan, the sensor in his sleeve buzzed faintly, a silent warning. The scanner's frequency matched Thera's description exactly. They weren't here to inspect the station. They were hunting her. The reception took place in the conference room, where Alliance officials and crew stood in rigid rows, exchanging forced smiles and pleasantries. Ethan maintained a calm facade, his hands in his pockets to hide clenched fists. "Your station is impressive, Lieutenant Caldwell," Clive said, his voice smooth as silk but his eyes probing, as if scanning Ethan's very cells. "Where's Thera?" "I hear she's a brilliant scientist, a valuable asset to Aurora 7. The word asset carried a strange weight, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. He smiled, masking the storm within. "She's in the lab, analyzing samples, sir," he replied, his voice light but steady. "Busy work, you know." Anther's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the scanner, fingers hovering over its controls as if itching to activate it. "I want to see her," he said, his voice low and icy. "Today." Ethan's blood roared, but he kept the smile, nodding as if in agreement. "I'll let her know," he said, then excused himself with a pretext about checking the air filtration system. As the conference room door slid shut behind him, he bolted down the corridor, his steps urgent, heart hammering. Thera was right. They knew she was here, and Anther's scanner was a direct threat. He had to find her before they did. The main corridor of Aurora 7 blazed with light, but Ethan veered into the maintenance tunnels, slipping into a web of shadowed passages where massive conduits hissed like a living machine's breath. Darkness enveloped him, guided only by the dim glow of emergency panels. In a hidden corner of the tunnels, he found Thera, standing silently in the shadows, the neural lattice on her back faintly visible through her jacket, a suppressed blue flame. She wore a technician's coat to conceal it, but the light still bled through, as if alive, reacting to his presence. "They know I'm here," she whispered, her voice taut, her violet eyes blazing with fear and resolve. "Anther's device, it can trigger the lattice, paralyze me, or worse." Ethan took her hand, feeling the chill of her silver skin, but her fingers gripped his, clinging to a thread of hope. "I can jam the signal," he said, his mind racing like a machine at full throttle. "If I get the exact frequency from Anther's device, I can build a disruptor to neutralize it." Thera shook her head, her silver hair falling over her shoulders. "It's too dangerous, Ethan. If they suspect you, they won't just come for me. They'll come for you." Ethan grinned, a stubborn, human grin, his eyes glinting with a mix of confidence and recklessness. "Danger's my specialty," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm an engineer, Thera. I don't run from problems, I fix them." She looked at him, her gaze wavering between worry and a spark of admiration, as if his resolve was chipping away at her defenses. But before she could respond, the heavy clang of metallic footsteps echoed from afar, steady and ominous. Valtharian patrol. Ethan pulled Thera into a narrow alcove, their bodies pressed close in the tight space, breaths mingling. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, his hand tightening around hers. The shrill hum of the scanner grew louder, each note a hammer against their nerves. As the patrol passed, Ethan felt Thera's heartbeat, rapid and strong, through her thin jacket. In that perilous moment, she suddenly touched his cheek, her cold fingers brushing against his skin, a reminder of life amidst the darkness. "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to be part of this. You could walk away, live your life." He looked into her eyes, seeing a universe in those violet depths, vast and enigmatic. "Because you don't deserve to live in fear, he replied, his voice steady as vow. And because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you stepped onto this station. She smiled, a faint, warm smile, like a star piercing the void. In the tunnel's darkness, they kissed, a fierce, desperate kiss, as if time was running out. Her lips were cool, but her breath was warm, a contrast that sent a shiver through Ethan. His hands tangled in her silver hair, feeling its silken strands, while her fingers gripped his shoulders, anchoring herself in the storm. But a sharp clang, metal striking metal, snapped them back. Ethan pulled away, breathless, his eyes scanning the shadows. They're coming back, he whispered, grabbing her hand. Move! We're not done yet! They plunged deeper into the tunnels, the darkness swallowing them, the sound of pursuing footsteps echoing behind, like the pulse of a relentless predator. Ethan and Thera hid in the maintenance tunnels of Aurora 7, where the darkness was thick, broken only by the faint red glow of emergency panels. The hiss of ventilation mingled with their ragged breaths, creating a tense symphony. Ethan gripped Thera's hand, feeling the cool silver of her skin, but her eyes, violet and blazing like distant nebulae, remained defiant, as if challenging the universe itself. They just evaded a Valtharian patrol, but safety was a fleeting illusion, like a calm before a cosmic storm. Suddenly, Ethan's comms unit buzzed, shattering the silence. Lieutenant Caldwell, report to the command center immediately. Colonel Ramsey's voice sliced through, cold and emotionless, like a blade through the void. Ethan exchanged a glance with Thera, his heart pounding. Ramsey never calls me at this hour, he whispered, his voice low, laced with unease. Something's wrong. Thera squeezed his hand, her fingers tight, her gaze steady but tinged with worry. Go, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I'll stay here, in the shadows. But be careful, Ethan. Don't let them see you waver. He nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. I'll be back, he promised, his fingers brushing her cheek, feeling the chill of her silver skin. Don't move. Thera gave a faint smile, fragile yet brave, like a spark in the dark. Ethan turned, plunging out of the tunnels, his steps echoing on the metal floor, his heart racing like an overtaxed engine. With every step, the image of the neural lattice on Thera's back burned brighter, its glowing lines a warning of a secret larger than he'd imagined. The command center of Aurora 7 blazed with white light, but the air was cold, as if all warmth had been sucked into the void. Colonel Ramsey sat behind his desk, his eyes sharp and icy, his hands clasped as if restraining a storm within. Beside him stood a Valtharian Ethan hadn't seen before, a female officer with long silver hair, her natural patterns shimmering like living circuits across her neck and arms. She stood rigid, her violet eyes cold as frozen stars. Lieutenant Caldwell, Ramsey said, his voice low, each word a stone dropped into still water. This is Commander Silva, special advisor to the Valtharian delegation. She has questions about Thera. Ethan's blood froze, as if the room had lost gravity. Thera's name in Ramsey's mouth sounded like an accusation, but he kept his face neutral, flashing a faint smile. Thera? He replied, his voice light, as if discussing a routine colleague. She's in the lab, sir. Probably buried in her samples. Silva stepped forward, her metal boots clicking on the floor, her smile as cold as a dead star's light. Don't play coy, Lieutenant, she said, her voice smooth but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. We know she's hiding. And we know you're helping her. Her words hit Ethan like a fist, but the real shock came next. Silva tilted her head, her eyes probing, and continued, her voice low but commanding. Colonel Ramsey has been cooperative. He's provided details on every operation in this station, including Thera's presence. Ethan turned to Ramsey, his heart hammering, threatening to burst from his chest. Ramsey, the stern but fair commander Ethan had respected, now met his gaze with a flicker of regret. I didn't want this, Caldwell, Ramsey said, his voice heavy, tinged with hesitation. But she's a threat. She's not human, she's a weapon, a product of an illegal program. The Alliance can't risk it. Ethan clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms, fighting the rage surging within. "She's a person, sir," he growled, each word a bullet. "She works, laughs, lives like any of us. And you've betrayed your own crew." Ramsey's brow furrowed, but he didn't respond, his eyes wavering, as if wrestling with his own conscience. Silva, unmoved, raised a small device, no larger than a comms unit, pulsing with a red glow like blood in the dark. "This is the activator," she said, her voice icy. "One signal, and Thera's neural lattice will bring her to her knees, agony, paralysis, or worse. Bring her out, Lieutenant, or we'll scan the entire station, and everyone will pay." Adrenaline flooded Ethan, but he forced a faint smile, masking the panic roaring in his mind. "You want me to betray a teammate?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery, his eyes sharp, like an engineer analyzing a broken machine. "Not exactly human style." Silva's eyes narrowed, the red glow of the activator reflecting in her gaze, but she didn't reply. Ramsey stood, his voice harder. "This isn't the time for stubbornness, Caldwell. Bring her out, or I'll order your arrest." Ethan nodded, as if complying, but his mind raced, calculating every option. "Understood, sir," he said, then turned, striding out of the command center, his heart heavy. The corridor outside blazed with light, but Ethan felt as if he were stepping into a black hole. Ramsey was a traitor, a shock that forced him to rethink every plan, every trust. The commander he'd once admired, who'd led Aurora 7 through crises, had sold Thera out for Valtharian tech, to secure his place in the Alliance. The betrayal cut like a knife, but it sharpened Ethan's resolve. He sprinted back to the tunnels, disabling his comms to avoid tracking, his steps pounding the metal floor. Thera was waiting, and he had to reach her before Silva activated that deadly device. But one question gnawed at him: if Ramsey had turned, who else on this station was an enemy? He clenched his fists, determination blazing. Whatever happened, he wouldn't let Thera fall into their hands. Never. Ethan tore back into Aurora 7's maintenance tunnels, his heart pounding like a thruster pushed to its limit. The darkness was oppressive, pierced only by the dim red glow of emergency panels, but each of his steps rang out on the metal floor, a drumbeat of urgency. Ramsey's betrayal burned in his mind, a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The commander he trusted, who'd guided Aurora 7 through storms, was now the enemy, and Thera, the woman with violet eyes and a deadly secret, was being hunted. He activated his encrypted comms, his voice urgent but hushed. "Thera, Ramsey's sold us out. They know you're here. Get to Sector 9B, now!" Through the static, her voice crackled, strained but resolute, like a flame refusing to die. "Got it. Meet you there." But beneath her strength, Ethan caught a tremor of fear, spurring him to run faster, sweat streaming down his face despite the cold. Sector 9B was a secluded corner of the tunnel network, where massive conduits hissed like the breath of a living machine. Ethan reached the rendezvous, but Thera wasn't there. Instead, the shadows pulsed with the sound of heavy footsteps and the ominous red glow of scanning devices. A Valtharian patrol, at least 4 strong, prowled the area, their tall, silver-skinned figures moving with mechanical precision. Their scanners flashed wildly, emitting a shrill hum, like predatory insects. Ethan ducked behind a massive conduit, his breath ragged, his heart hammering so loud he feared they'd hear it. He clenched his fists, the sensor in his sleeve buzzing faintly, confirming the scanner's frequency. They'd found her, and he was too late. Suddenly, a scream tore through the air, Thera's voice, sharp and laced with pain, echoing from deeper in the tunnels. Ethan didn't think. He sprinted toward the sound, heedless of the risk, his boots slipping on the damp floor. The tunnels twisted, red light flickering like blood in the dark, guiding him to a hidden alcove. There, Thera was pinned by 2 Valtharian soldiers, her arms wrenched behind her, her silver hair disheveled. Her technician's coat was torn, exposing the neural lattice on her back, glowing a brilliant blue, as if reacting to the enemy's scanners. The light pulsed wildly, syncing with the scanner's shrill hum, and Thera gritted her teeth, her face contorted in agony. Let her go! Ethan roared, drawing his plasma pistol, its green glow illuminating his furious face. A towering Valtharian, his neck shimmering with patterns, sneered, his voice like metal grinding. Drop your weapon, human, or she dies here. He raised his scanner, fingers hovering over its controls, the red light intensifying. Thera, despite her pain, lifted her head, her violet eyes blazing with defiance. Don't listen, Ethan! She shouted, her voice trembling but firm. Run! They'll kill you too! But Ethan didn't budge, his gaze locked on her, as if the universe had narrowed to just them. I'm not leaving you, he said, his voice low but unyielding, a vow carved in stone. Then Thera moved. With a burst of unnatural strength, she tore free from the soldier's grip, her body a blur of motion. She spun, landing a precise strike to the throat of the nearest soldier, sending him crashing down, his scanner clattering to the floor and shattering. Ethan froze, stunned, but there was no time to process. The second soldier roared, lunging at Thera, but she dodged with inhuman agility, driving a fist into his chest, forcing him back. The lattice on her back flared, a reactor at full power, but her face twisted in pain, as if each movement was torture. The lattice, it doesn't just control, she gasped, her eyes meeting Ethan's. It amplifies strength, but the cost is pain. Ethan snapped into action. He aimed his plasma pistol, firing a shot into the second soldier's shoulder, dropping him. But the blast echoed, and instantly, a piercing alarm wailed through the station, like the scream of a wounded beast. The remaining patrol was closing in, their heavy footsteps thundering from all directions. Ethan rushed to Thera, pulling her into a shadowed nook, checking the gash on her arm, where silver blood glistened under the dim light. You okay? He asked, his voice urgent. She nodded, but her eyes were clouded with pain. The lattice, it's reacting. If they fully activate it, I won't last. Ethan gripped her hand, his eyes burning with human tenacity. They won't get the chance, he said, his voice steady. But before they could move, a metallic screech rang out, and massive steel doors slammed shut, sealing the tunnel sector. Silva, from somewhere in the system, had triggered an emergency lockdown. Red warning lights flashed, bathing Thera's pale face in crimson. We're trapped, she gasped, blood dripping to the floor. Ethan knelt, scanning the door with a small tech tool from his belt, his eyes glinting with focus. Not yet, he said, a stubborn grin flickering. I'm an engineer, remember? I know every inch of this place. He began prying open the door's control panel, his fingers moving with the speed of a maestro in a storm. Thera, how long can you hold out? He asked, eyes fixed on the wiring. She leaned against the wall, her breath shallow. A few minutes if they don't boost the signal. But Ethan, if I use the lattice again, it could kill me. He paused, just for a second, his eyes meeting hers, filled with worry but unwavering. Then we won't let it come to that, he said, his voice low. Save your strength. I'll get us out. The patrol's footsteps grew closer, the red glow of their scanners flickering in the dark, like the eyes of a monster. Ethan tightened his grip on the tool, determination blazing. They weren't done, not while he still had breath. Ethan led Thera through a secret passage in Aurora 7's maintenance tunnels, a narrow, damp corridor he'd once used for covert repairs, hidden from Ramsey's watchful eyes. The darkness was suffocating, broken only by the hiss of ventilation and the drip of condensation from the conduits. Red emergency lights cast a faint glow on Thera's face, highlighting her pale silver skin and violet eyes, dimmed by pain. The gash on her arm still bled, silver blood shimmering like mercury, leaving glowing trails on the metal floor. Ethan held her hand, feeling her tremble, but her gaze remained resolute, a fire that refused to die despite the storm. Keep going, he whispered, his voice low but steady. We're almost to a safe spot. They stopped in a shadowed alcove, the darkness shielding them from the red glare of the alarms. Thera slumped against the cold wall, her hand pressing the wound, her face twisting in pain. The lattice, it's reacting, she gasped, her voice shaky. If Silva fully triggers the activator, I won't hold out. It'll tear me apart from the inside. Ethan knelt, his eyes scanning her wound, his fingers brushing her silver skin gently, careful not to worsen her pain. Her blood stained his hand, cold and glistening, a reminder of their differences, and the bond he couldn't deny. I won't let that happen, he said, his voice deep, a promise etched in steel. I've got a plan. He sat beside her, pulling a small tech device from his pocket, its screen flickering with blue light. Listen, he began, his voice low but brimming with resolve, like an engineer tackling an impossible puzzle. We'll infiltrate the main control room, where Silva keeps the activator. If I can tap into the station's systems, I'll broadcast a jamming signal to neutralize the lattice before they can trigger it. Thera frowned, her eyes clouded with pain but sharp with a scientist's logic. The control room's heavily guarded, she said, her voice weak but precise. Ramsey's watching everything. And after that fight, they'll be on high alert. Ethan flashed a faint grin, his eyes glinting with stubborn human defiance. They don't know this station like I do. I built these systems, Thera. I know how to break them. She looked at him, her gaze wavering between fear and a spark of hope, as if his confidence was the only thing keeping her upright. You're insane, she whispered, but the corner of her mouth twitched, a faint, warm smile. Ethan touched her cheek, his fingers grazing her silver skin, feeling her trembling breath. Insanity's how humans pull off miracles, he teased, his voice light but his eyes burning, as if swearing to reshape the cosmos for her. Thera grasped his hand, squeezing gently, and in that moment, amidst the danger and darkness, they felt a connection deeper than words, like two lost stars finding each other in the void. But before they could move, a cold voice cut through the shadows, sharp as a blade. Caldwell, stop. Ethan's hand snapped to his plasma pistol, but he froze when he recognized the voice. Lieutenant Kara, his closest friend and the station's comms officer, stepped from the darkness, her pistol aimed at them. The red glow of the alarms lit her face, revealing pained eyes and tightly pressed lips. I don't want to do this, Ethan, she said, her voice trembling, each word a wound to her own heart. But Ramsey ordered it. Thera's a threat. Ethan reeled, as if doused with ice water. Kara, who had faced deadly missions with him, who'd shared Stellaris during long nights, had turned against him. Kara, he said, his voice hoarse, fighting for calm. She's not a threat. She's one of us. She saved my life in the tunnels, and you know it. Kara shook her head, her pistol steady but her eyes wavering, torn. I have a family, Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking. Ramsey threatened to exile them if I didn't comply. I have no choice. Thera, despite her weakness, stood tall, her violet eyes blazing with resolve. She stepped forward, slow but steady, ignoring her wound and the lattice's pain. Kara, she said, her voice soft but powerful, like a scientist stating an undeniable truth. I know fear. I've lived with it my whole life, running, hiding. But if you turn me in, they won't stop. They'll hunt others like me, innocents who didn't choose this fate. Her words echoed in the dark, raw and piercing, a light cutting through the night. Kara hesitated, her pistol trembling, her eyes flickering between Ethan and Thera. Ethan seized the moment, lunging forward, disarming her with a swift, precise move. Kara didn't resist, standing frozen, her eyes hollow, as if a piece of her soul had shattered. Kara, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. Help us or step aside. But don't let Ramsey turn you into someone you're not. After a tense second, Kara's shoulders slumped, as if a weight had lifted. All right, she whispered, her voice raw. I'm in. But if we fail, it's not just Thera, we're all dead. Ethan nodded, handing her pistol back, a gesture of trust. Then we don't fail, he said, his eyes blazing. He turned to Thera, checking her wound again. You ready? Thera nodded, her face pale but resolute. Ready, she replied, her voice faint but fierce. Ethan took her hand, their gazes locked, as if drawing strength from each other. With Kara at their side, they plunged into the darkness, heading for the control room, where their fate would be decided. The alarms wailed, a relentless pulse, reminding them time was slipping away. The ventilation ducts of Aurora 7 were cramped and stifling, the air thick with the tang of metal and machine oil. But Ethan led the way with the precision of an engineer who knew every bolt in this station. Thera followed close behind, her breath shallow, each step a battle against the pain radiating from the neural lattice. Silver blood still seeped from the gash on her arm, glinting under the faint glow of Ethan's tech light. Kara brought up the rear, her plasma pistol gripped tightly, her eyes sharp but betraying a flicker of unease. Ramsey's betrayal and the Valtharian delegation's pursuit had pushed them into a desperate gambit, and the main control room, the heart of the station, was where it would all end. Ethan paused at Event Great, peering through the slats into the control room below. "We're here," he whispered, his voice low but resolute. Below, the harsh white light of the control panels illuminated the tense faces of Silva and Ramsey. The activator, a small but lethal device, sat on the main console, pulsing with a red glow like a beating heart. Silva, her long silver hair shimmering, snarled, her voice icy. "She can't have gone far. Amplify the signal now!" Ramsey, standing opposite, shook his head, his eyes flickering with anger and worry. "Do that, and the whole station will know," he said, his voice tight. "The Alliance will investigate, and we'll all be exposed." Silva's lips curled in a sneer, the activator's red light reflecting in her eyes. "Afraid of losing your rank, Colonel? Don't worry, the Valtharians will protect you if you obey." Ethan signaled Kara, his eyes sharp, like an engineer plotting a complex circuit. "Create a diversion," he whispered. Kara nodded, taking a deep breath, then slipped into the main corridor, feigning panic. She burst into the control room, her voice trembling but convincing. "Colonel! There's an explosion in the storage bay! The oxygen system's leaking!" Ramsey spun, his face darkening. "What? Who reported this?" He strode to a secondary console, fingers flying over the screen, fully absorbed in the false alert. Silva's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Kara, but before she could react, Ethan and Thera moved. Ethan kicked open the vent grate, dropping into the control room, his plasma pistol aimed at the two Valtharian guards. Thera followed, her body trembling, but her violet eyes burned with defiance. Chaos erupted, swift and brutal. Ethan fired a plasma bolt, its blue arc tearing through the air, striking a guard's shoulder, sending him sprawling. The second guard charged, but Thera, despite her pain, activated the lattice. Its blue glow erupted from her back, blazing like a reactor, and she delivered a powerful kick, slamming the guard into a metal wall, where he collapsed, motionless. But each movement made her grit her teeth, her face contorted in agony, as if the lattice was draining her life. Ethan sprinted to the main console, his hands a blur as he plugged his tech device into the system. The activator lay inches away, its red pulse a silent threat. "Hold on, Thera!" he shouted, fingers dancing over the keys, uploading the jamming signal he designed in his mind over sleepless hours. But Silva was faster than a hunting cat. She snatched the activator, pressing a secondary button, and an invisible wave surged. Thera screamed, collapsing to the floor, her body convulsing, the lattice blazing as if tearing her apart from within. "She's ours!" Silva roared, lunging at Ethan, her sharp nails glinting like blades. Ethan braced for impact, but before Silva reached him, a plasma bolt rang out, its blue light slicing the air. Silva crumpled, silver blood pooling from her chest, her eyes wide with shock. Kara stood behind, pistol raised, her face pale but her gaze steady. "Finish it, Ethan!" she yelled, her voice trembling but firm. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned back to the console, completing the signal upload. The screens flickered, the station's systems hummed, and a white flash burst from the activator, like a small explosion. The piercing signal's hum stopped, and Thera's convulsions ceased. She slumped to the floor, her breath ragged, but the lattice's blue glow faded, like a fire snuffed out. Ethan rushed to her, kneeling, lifting her gently, his fingers brushing her pale face. "Thera, you okay?" he asked, his voice rough with worry. She opened her eyes, their violet depths blazing with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "It stopped," she whispered, her voice faint but triumphant. Ethan squeezed her hand, feeling her weak but stubborn pulse. "You did it," he said, a smile breaking through his weary face. "We did it." Kara stepped forward, her eyes shifting between relief and unease. "We're not out yet," she said, her voice low. "Ramsey's still here, and the alarms are active. The Alliance will know soon." Ethan nodded, scanning the control room, where Silva's body lay still and the activator was now just lifeless metal. "We need to leave the station," he said, his voice firm. "But first, we make sure no one else can trigger the lattice." He stood, pulling Thera up, supporting her against his shoulder. She trembled, but her eyes locked onto his, drawing strength from his presence. Ramsey, still in the corner, spoke suddenly, his voice hoarse. "Caldwell, you don't know what you've done. They'll hunt you, all of us." Ethan turned, his eyes cold. "You chose the wrong side, Colonel. Now you pay." He nodded to Kara, who bound Ramsey with tech cables, her gaze never leaving her former commander. The control room fell silent, but the alarms wailed in the corridors, like the pulse of a beast stirring. Ethan held Thera's hand, his eyes blazing. "We're not done," he whispered. "But this time, we fight together." The victory in Aurora 7's control room was a fleeting spark, like a star flaring before the void reclaimed it. Ethan, Thera, and Kara barely had time to breathe before a piercing screech erupted from the station's systems. The main screen flashed red, and a mechanical voice boomed, cold and relentless. "Self-destruct sequence activated. Station will detonate in 20 minutes. Ethan spun, his eyes scanning the room, only to see Ramsey, still bound, grinning wickedly. "If I can't win, no one will!" he roared, tearing free from the cables with desperate strength and bolting into the corridor, vanishing into the shadows. Ethan's fists clenched, rage surging, but there was no time to pursue. "Damn it!" he growled, grabbing Thera and Kara. "Move! Escape pods, now!" The main corridors of Aurora 7 shuddered, red warning lights pulsing like blood, bathing Thera's pale face in crimson. She ran beside Ethan, her breasts ragged, silver blood still dripping from her arm, but her violet eyes burned with unyielding resolve, a defiance that left Ethan in awe. Kara led the way, plasma pistol ready, her eyes sharp, as if redeeming her earlier betrayal. They raced through twisting corridors, the alarm screaming like a wounded creature, urging them faster. But as they neared the escape pod bay, a faint cry for help echoed from the lab sector. Ethan stopped, his heart pounding. "Civilians!" he whispered, his eyes darting to the side passage. Thera halted, her gaze unwavering, a flame that refused to die. "We have to save them," she said, her voice firm despite her trembling body. Ethan shook his head, his heart twisting. "There's no time, Thera! The station's got less than 15 minutes. But Thera grabbed his hand, her cold fingers squeezing, her eyes locking onto his, filled with resolve and something deeper, humanity. "If I don't do this, Ethan, I'm no different from the weapon they made me," she whispered, her voice shaking but powerful. "I didn't survive all this to be a coward." Ethan stared at her, his chest aching, but he nodded, unable to deny those eyes. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we do it together." They charged into the lab sector, where a group of civilians, scientists, technicians, maintenance crew, were trapped behind a jammed steel door. Black smoke billowed from sparking consoles, and distant explosions signaled the station's collapse. Ethan and Kara pried at the door with tech tools, while Thera guided the civilians, her voice calm but commanding, a beacon in the storm. But as they led the group through an auxiliary exit, a deafening screech rang out, and a massive steel door slammed down, splitting them. Thera, on the other side with the civilians, was trapped, while Ethan and Kara stood outside. "Thera!" Ethan bellowed, lunging at the door, pounding the cold metal. He dropped to his knees, tearing at the control panel, fingers flying, but the system was locked by the self-destruct protocol. Through the door's small window, Thera met his gaze, her face pale but her smile soft, like the last star before dawn. "You gave me freedom, Ethan," she said, her voice faint but clear, each word a knife in his heart. "Now live for both of us." Before he could reply, she turned, activating an auxiliary vent system with a tech device, forcing the civilians through an escape chute. But the rush of air pulled her back, and the steel door sealed, locking her inside. "No!" Ethan screamed, hammering the door, tears streaming down his face, but Kara yanked him back, her voice shaking. "Ethan, we have to go. The station's going to blow." He fought her, but her strength and the nearing explosions forced him to run. They sprinted to the escape pods, dragging the civilians, and launched from Aurora 7 seconds before it erupted. A blinding white light consumed everything, like a supernova, and Ethan, staring through the pod's window, felt his heart shatter. Thera was gone, and with her, a piece of his soul. 3 months later, Ethan stood on the observation deck of the Alliance ship Intrepid, his eyes hollow as he gazed at the twinkling stars through the thick viewport. He'd survived, hailed as a hero for saving the civilians, but each night, Thera's image haunted him, her gentle smile, her violet eyes. He lived, but as a shell, his heart still buried in Aurora 7's wreckage. Kara, now Intrepid's commander, approached, resting a hand on his shoulder. "She saved us all, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but heavy with truth. "She's the real hero." Suddenly, a strange signal blinked on the main console, breaking the silence. Ethan frowned, stepping forward, fingers brushing the screen. As he opened the signal, a weak but unmistakable voice crackled through, a miracle from the cosmos. "Ethan. I'm alive." His heart stopped, his breath catching. It was Thera. He raced to the comms room, shouting at the duty officer. "Trace that signal. Now." An Alliance rescue ship had found Thera in a coma, adrift in a fragment of Aurora 7. She'd used the Neural Lattice to shield herself, forming an energy barrier, but at the cost of near death. Ethan sprinted to Intrepid's medbay, his heart pounding, as if racing through another tunnel. In the sterile room, Thera lay on a bed, her silver skin pale, but her violet eyes opened, blazing when she saw him. "I told you we weren't done," she whispered, her voice weak but carrying her familiar smile. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms, tears falling freely for the first time since the explosion. "You scared the hell out of me," he whispered, his voice breaking, but his smile shone, like a star piercing the void. In the medbay's soft light, they held hands, and Ethan knew that no matter how vast the universe, they would always find each other, like two lost stars finally converging.